It's May 19th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the first televised presidential debate over the weekend. The four main runners sparred over strategies to revitalize South Korea's economy and ways to deal with issues related to the Trump administration's trade policies. Constitutional reforms, including shortening the presidential term, also topped the agenda in Sunday's debate. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warns that tariff rates will soon return to a, quote, reciprocal level if countries do not reach a trade agreement during the 90-day pause. There are worries that such pressure will not be left just as a warning, with the much downgraded U.S. credit rating due to fiscal deficits and interest burdens. The Israeli military on Sunday launched an extensive ground operation across Gaza, killing over 100 people, while announcing it'll allow a basic amount of food to enter Gaza to make sure no starvation crisis develops. South Korea's presidential contenders held their first televised debate on Sunday night, with strong clashes and some alignments on economic and trade policy. Our Oh Soo-young fills us in.
Pledging to save Korea from its present economic downturn, the four main presidential candidates held their first televised debate live on Sunday, beginning with the task of improving livelihoods. Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung promised big government spending, with funding towards debt forgiveness for small business owners, more research and development in AI, and new industries in energy and culture.
We need a supplementary budget as soon as possible, within feasible limits, to revive domestic demand and everyday livelihoods.
The People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo agreed on boosting spending to offer subsidies and debt restructuring for small firms. He pledged to be a, quote, jobs president, using regulatory reform to support growth in high-tech sectors.
By eliminating excessive regulations, businesses won't feel forced to move abroad and can confidently operate locally and create jobs.
Reform Party leader Jun-seok opposed reckless injections of money in time of high inflation and low demand, saying it will hurt, not benefit, small companies. He proposed regional governments set their own minimum wage and focus more on building national competence in sectors critical to economic growth.
To beat China, we need not only an understanding of science and technology, but also competent leadership that can communicate freely with global leaders.
Meanwhile, the Democratic Labour Party's Young-kuk focused more on overcoming inequality for workers, farmers, women and minorities.
A world where you work hard yet remain poor, where you are driven further to the margins. This unequal world must not be left as it is.
With the topic turning to America's tariffs on its trading partners, Lee Jae-myung said negotiations must begin, but Korea must also diversify its export items. He said the door should stay open to Russia and China. Kim Moon-soo promised to hold a summit with US leader Donald Trump and resolve bilateral issues based on their personal trust. Lee Jun-seok suggested a cool strategic response that highlights South Korea's strength in semiconductors and its value as Washington's long-standing security partner. Young-kuk showed the US a red card and said he will not submit to predatory trade tactics. The two candidates leading the polls faced intensive questioning. Lee Jae-myung was under fire for his proposed wind power project, largely involving Chinese firms, and his alleged affinity with Beijing. He was also grilled on alleged illegal payments made to North Korea during his time as Gyeonggi-do province governor, with the Reform Party candidate suggesting Lee's plans to legalize domestic spot cryptocurrency ETFs could also potentially fund North Korea. Meanwhile, Kim Moon-soo was strongly criticized for being a part of the impeached Yoon Suk-yeol administration as former Labour Minister. Lee Jae-myung said Kim should share the blame for the sluggish economy. And Young-kuk slammed Kim's endorsement of allowing extra working hours for semiconductor workers. The next live debate will take place on Friday, focusing on social issues. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now, the anniversary of the May 18 pro-democratization movement usually pushes politicians to address constitutional reform. And this year was no different with a presidential election going on. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
Against the backdrop of the May 18 pro-democratization movement anniversary, the presidential race is heating up over the issue of constitutional reform. It began with Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung posting on Facebook renewing calls to enshrine the spirit of the movement in the Constitution and carry its legacy forward. But what drew more attention was his push to overhaul Korea's power structure, proposing a 4-year presidential term with the possibility of re-election similar to the US model. The rival People Power Party had already floated a similar idea, but took it a step further, suggesting the next president serve a shortened 3-year term, allowing the new 4-year system to begin in 2028 in line with the next general election. He said such limitations are only necessary for those who abuse presidential power.
What truly matters isn't just constitutional reform, but restoring stability, reviving the economy, and improving people's lives.
The PPP candidate Kim Moo-soo welcomed the discussion, even proposing to scrap a presidential immunity from criminal prosecution, which would mean presidents could face trial even while in office. He also called for an immediate agreement from Lee to amend the constitution. Another key turning point came Saturday with impeached former President Yoon announcing he would leave the People Power Party. Pressure had been building, especially after the PPP's interim leader publicly urged him to leave. Yoon said he would continue to support the PPP as a private citizen, not as a party member. With the race still overshadowed by Yoon's martial law controversy and impeachment, the PPP has struggled to boost its approval ratings. Kim responded briefly, repeating his stance that Yoon's decision is his alone.
I respect the president's decision to leave the party. The party will now unite stronger and reform more to reflect the people's will.
Opposition parties were quick to call it a political maneuver. The DP's Lee Jae-myung said the PPP should have expelled Yoon long ago and called his departure a fake exit. With presidential power and the legacy of martial law both looming over the race, voters now head into the final stretch, with just over 2 weeks left until the June 3rd election. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
A top U.S. economic official says the Trump administration will raise tariffs again if countries don't reach trade agreements during the 90-day pause period, now further raising tariff pressure. Peun-ji has the details.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who acts as a principal advisor to Trump, has said tariff rates will soon return to a reciprocal level for nations that do not reach trade agreements during the 90-day pause. In an interview with CNN on Sunday local time, he said Trump has put the countries on notice that if they don't negotiate in good faith, they will ratchet back up to the April 2nd level. Calling it a Liberation Day, Trump announced a set of reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd, before putting a temporary pause to those levies for 90 days. Speaking during a business roundtable in Abu Dhabi on Friday, he said that time is running out for countries to make a trade deal with the United States.
And we have, at the same time, 150 countries that want to make a deal, but you're not able to see that many countries. So at a certain point over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think Scott and Howard will be sending letters out essentially telling people, it would be very fair, but we'll be telling people what they'll be paying to do business in the United States.
Meanwhile, Bessent also noted there are 18 important trading partners that the United States is most focused on solidifying deals with, while adding that there are a lot of smaller trading relationships. As the deadline looms, he said Washington may impose some tariffs by region rather than on individual countries, saying they may impose a certain rate for Central America and a certain rate for Africa. Amid growing pressure, South Korea, which faces 25% U.S. reciprocal tariffs, is also making efforts to reach a trade deal. The country's finance minister and trade minister met with Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer in late April and requested exemptions from higher levies. With only about 50 days left until the July 8th deadline, senior trade officials from Seoul are scheduled to hold more talks in Washington later this week. Peun-ji, Arirang News.
The United States, a 90-day tariff pause will end in about 50 days, which make the upcoming trade negotiations between Seoul and Washington more timely than ever. Let us turn to Professor Greg Butchik for more. Welcome back, Professor Butchik.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So the trade talks this time will focus on technical discussions on 6 areas related to trade. And now they are trade imbalances, non-tariff measures, economic security, country of origin of products, and commercial considerations. To start off, why these areas?
Yeah, so let me try to unpack kind of what these things mean, and I'll give you some color on sort of what the U.S. complaints are. So trade imbalances, this is sort of the headline number that you'll hear Trump complain a lot about. It refers to Korea's roughly $29 billion bilateral trade surplus with the U.S. That means the U.S. imports about $29 billion more from Korea than Korea imports from the U.S. Okay, so standard economic trade theory says these bilateral trade imbalances, they're normal. They just kind of reflect comparative advantages in different areas. The Trump administration, though, has this very strong view that some of these surpluses are attributable to kind of unfair trade practices like tariffs, but also non-tariff measures. So that's kind of the second issue, are these non-tariff measures. Even though there aren't necessarily formal tariffs, countries can put up trade barriers with things like regulations that kind of slow down economic activity. Trump has the view that other countries have put up these barriers and wants to bring them down. The third issue, which I actually think is probably in the administration's mind the most important one, is what they call economic security. Now, what they mean here is sort of these making kind of critical economic inputs, semiconductor ingredients, things that are used to make batteries and pharmaceuticals, kind of robust to potentially hostile foreign power, and kind of trying to onshore or friendshore these critical supply lines. So kind of like the concern that's in the background here is China is the sole source for a lot of rare earth metals, critical in battery production, and in the event that they would invade Taiwan, for example, China could sort of use the fact that it's the critical provider to deter the U.S. or other allies from intervening, and the U.S. wants to be able to kind of avoid that blackmail. And then, sort of connected to the China issue is the country of origin thing. These are the so-called transshipments, which is saying, okay, the U.S. has high tariffs on China. The concern is that Chinese companies can kind of get around these tariffs by shipping goods through another country, like through Korea, and then to the U.S. to avoid the high tariffs, and the U.S. wants to kind of shut off this escape route. The other things, digital trade, commercial issues, there's sort of like this general grab bag of complaints, potential collaborations even that large U.S. companies have had, things like data localization, app store fees, kind of different issues that crop up in different industries. So lots of issues. They're not really unexpected. Trump has kind of been pushing on these things since 2008, since the first time he was president.
Well, thank you for that thorough explanation. But Professor Butchik, I know trade imbalances will no doubt top the agenda, but will other areas be included in the discussions, let's say shipbuilding?
Yeah, so I think that connects to what I really think is the critical thing here, which is the economic security issue. So on that front, the White House would like to kind of get this big headline win on so-called friendshoring semiconductor and battery supply chains. That is, the U.S. kind of wants to have these supply chains run through an allied country like Korea. Now, there's a sort of another potential economic security win for Korea in that same sort of area, which is the proposed Alaska LNG project. Washington is kind of arguing this would provide a secure source of natural gas shipped from Alaska for Korea that doesn't rely on sort of shipping through potentially unstable Mideast shipping routes. Now, on the shipbuilding question, I think that's very much on the table, could be part of this Alaska liquid natural gas project. Additionally, the U.S. wants to have kind of a non-Chinese source of large merchant marine vessels, and it's sort of easy to see that this would fit very neatly into this economic security program. So that seems like an important and potentially beneficial area for coordination.
Well, then I do have to ask, what do you think the U.S. really wants? Because speculations are high that the U.S. will demand what it wants at this time.
Yeah, so I think Trump has been consistent really around 3 things. The first is this headline bilateral trade deficit number, which just, I think, looms very large in his head. Things like the LNG deal and various non-tariff measures could help address that. I think really, under the surface here is trying to lock in these sort of secure China-free supply chains for chips and battery inputs That means buying more from Korea, but it also puts some responsibility on Korea to kind of secure and get China out of their supply chains. And then the third thing on that is really this transshipment thing. So sort of close loopholes that undermine U.S. trade policy on China. I think sort of at this point, we're kind of beyond the initial phase of negotiations where Trump kind of like bombastically makes these grand statements. Secretary Bessent, Trade Representative Greer, like they're in the driver's seat. They're kind of serious technocratic people who are trying to make concrete steps.
Well, it's not going to be easy for the Team Korea to carry out those negotiations this time either. But what do you think Team Korea should aim for out of the second round of negotiations this time?
Yeah, so I think they really want to avoid this kind of 90-day tariff pause, like, avoid the uptick of the tariffs at the end of this tariff pause. Right. I think what's kind of reasonably on the table for Seoul to offer is things like get on board with the liquid natural gas purchases, formalize shipbuilding cooperation, align on some reciprocal non-tariff barriers, and importantly, kind of formalize at least a plan for this friendshoring of critical supply chains. I think these are all kind of actually mutual beneficial things for Korea and the U.S. And kind of with that, I think Korea can push back pretty hard against potential high tariffs on some key Korean exports like autos. So what would a win look like? I think sort of like a term sheet that kind of delineates various tariff carve-outs, sets some firm goals on these supply chain issues. I wouldn't expect the final agreement. This is really complicated kind of technocratic stuff, but something concrete that shows some meaningful progress and that the countries are formally aligned.
Well, do you think 50 days is enough for them to reach, the end deal? I mean, do you think they'll try to, try their best to reach the deal before the July 8th deadline?
If I had to guess, I think we will not. I think what's going to happen instead is both countries will sort of put out a show of sort of good faith progress, but not really the formal thing yet. And kind of with that, I think Secretary Bessent and Trump would be okay extending sort of the deadline if there's sort of solid progress being made.
All right, Professor Buchik, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You enjoy your evening there.
Thanks for having me.
Former U.S. President Joe Biden has been diagnosed with cancer, which doctors say has been metastasized to his bones. According to the New York Times on Sunday, the 82-year-old has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer. A spokesperson from Biden's office said the cancer appears to be hormone sensitive, which allows for effective management. The former U.S. leader and his family are now reviewing treatment options. President Donald Trump also took to social media to extend his best wishes to Biden and his family, hoping for a fast and successful recovery. The Israeli military has launched a wide-scale ground operation across Gaza, leading to massive casualties. However, over in Qatar, ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas continue, with Israel leaving open the possibility of a ceasefire. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Smoke rises from buildings across Gaza, with residents running to collapsed buildings to rescue those trapped inside. It's become a common sight in the enclave, with the Israeli military having launched an extensive new ground operation across the Gaza Strip Sunday, marking the fourth straight day of offensives in the region. The Israeli military says it is targeting Hamas military infrastructure above and below ground, destroying Hamas commanders and the militants' remaining forces, and rescue the remaining Israeli hostages. However, significant civilian casualties are being reported in the region. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry report that more than 400 people have been killed in the 4 days since the offensives began last week. This includes over 100 people killed in Gaza on Sunday. Meanwhile, Israel said ceasefire talks with Hamas have resumed in Doha, Qatar, adding that the negotiations are working on all possibilities, including ending the war. The remarks are a step back from their previous stance that the end of war is impossible until Hamas is completely eliminated. Local reports also say that the Hamas leader, Mohammed Sinwar, has been killed along with 10 of his associates. Sinwar, who was openly against negotiations with Israel, was found dead in Saudi Hamas-built tunnel during Israel's ground offensives. Israel has also announced that it will finally allow a basic amount of food to enter Gaza to ensure that a famine crisis does not develop after blockading the enclave for 10 weeks. 이승재, Arirang News.
Ukrainian military officials said Sunday that Russia had launched its largest drone attack since the invasion began in February 2022. Ukraine's Air Force said that the attack on Saturday night killed one person in Kyiv region and injured at least 3 others, including a 4-year-old child. Officials also said the strikes prove Russia has no intention of stopping the war despite international pressure for a ceasefire. And meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin reiterated Sunday that a peace deal with Ukraine should eliminate the causes that triggered this crisis and guarantee Russia's security. His comments come as U.S. President Donald Trump announced that he will speak separately to Putin and Zelensky on Monday about a potential ceasefire agreement.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Pope Leo XIV was formally inaugurated as the 267th pontiff of the Catholic Church on Sunday. The Mass in St. Peter's Square marked the official commencement of his papacy following his election on May 8th.
I was chosen without any merit of my own, and now, with fear and trembling, I come to you as a brother who desires to be the servant of your faith and your joy.
The inauguration Mass began with Pope Leo, the first American-born pope, praying at the tomb of St. Peter, symbolizing continuity with the apostolic tradition. He then traveled through the square in the Pope-mobile, watched by an estimated 200,000 attendees. Also at the ceremony were global figures such as U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. During the ceremony, Pope Leo received the pallium and the fisherman's ring, traditional symbols of papal authority. In his inaugural address, he emphasized unity, compassion, and social justice, calling for the Church to be one of unity and love, and to walk towards God and love one another. In Romania, pro-West centrist Bucharest Mayor Nicusor Dan has been elected as the country's new president. Dan defeated right-wing candidate George Simion in a closely watched runoff election on Sunday. With nearly all votes counted, Dan has secured approximately 54%, while Simion received about 46%. The election followed the cancellation of the previous year's results due to alleged foreign interference, favoring another right-wing candidate, Călin Georgescu. Dan, a 55-year-old mathematician and civic activist, campaigned with an emphasis on anti-corruption measures, judicial reform, and strengthening Romania's ties with the European Union and NATO. He said his victory reaffirmed Romania's commitment to democratic values and proved the incredible power of the Romanian society. In the United States, 2 people died and 22 others were injured when a Mexican Navy training vessel crashed into New York City's Brooklyn Bridge on Saturday evening. The ARM Cuauhtémoc, a tall ship of the Mexican Navy, was departing New York City as part of its Global Goodwill tour when it collided with the Brooklyn Bridge after the vessel lost steering control, causing it to drift. The ship was carrying 277 individuals and was scheduled to visit 22 ports in 15 countries over a 254-day voyage. No rescue operations were required as no one fell into the water as a result of the incident. Also in the United States, a car bomb detonated outside the American Reproductive Center's fertility clinic in Palm Springs, California on Saturday morning, killing the suspected bomber and injuring 4 others. The FBI called the incident an intentional act of terrorism by a 25-year-old suspect with anti-natalist beliefs. The suspect reportedly had nihilistic ideations and opposed procreation and also attempted to live stream the attack. The blast damaged the clinic and surrounding buildings, but no patients or embryos were harmed as the clinic was closed at the time.
After a welcome day of sunshine yesterday, we're looking at a return to unsettled weather today. The central regions will have overcast skies throughout the day with rain developing from the afternoon. The rain will begin in the capital area and Gangwon around lunchtime with 5 to 20 millimeters in the forecast, and the rain will clear for most areas by tomorrow morning. Rain will keep the capital area cool and breezy, but rain-free southern regions will see temperatures similar to a few degrees higher than yesterday under mostly sunny skies, so let's take a closer look. Seoul will climb to 21 degrees, Gwangju at 25, Daegu, Gyeongju warmer at 27 degrees. Then the capital area could see temperatures climbing to 27 degrees tomorrow and warmer on Wednesday. Meanwhile, we also have frequent rain in the forecast this week across Korea, especially in central areas and on Jeju. So be mindful of some changing skies in the weather picture this week.
That is all we have for this morning. We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time.